Good morning and welcome to today's state and federal programs meeting. We want to thank you for joining us today. I'm Adrienne Balcazar and I'd like to introduce the LCAP-State and Federal Programs Unit. Today joining us is Helen Choi, Laurel Estrada,
Morning.
Augustine Garcia, Rachel Garcia, and Anita Lomeli.
Good morning, everyone.
I also want to introduce our support staff, April Grease and Susanna Mendoza.
Good morning.
Good morning.
To access today's presentation, we ask you to click on the link in the chat. This will take you directly to the slides. If you use the link at the bottom of the slide, this will take you to our Canvas page. The presentation can be accessed through the icon as shown here, as well as the agenda and resources. Today's topics on our agenda will be the Title I, Part A will be for the parent and family engagement. For Title IV, we're going to take a look at the budget requirement. So we're going to talk about school site council. And for our FPM update, we're taking a closer look at a new requirement for comprehensive sexual health education. And our LCAP update will be covering the mid-year update and some timelines. Please place your questions in the chat box and we will answer any simple questions if we can, but we will always follow up with a written response in a Q&A format that will be emailed to each of you. We are also recording today's training and we will be posting this on our website. And so now I will turn it over to Augustine.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. So I'll be covering the first two sections this morning. First, I'll briefly go over some reminders when it comes to Title I, Part A, Parent and Family Engagement. And then I'll switch federal program gears and cover a new budget requirement for Title IV, Part A. So let's go ahead and get started. So with mid-November upon us, we're continuing our work with LEAs and schools to support parent and family engagement through the use of Title I, Part A funds. So as a reminder, an LEA that receives Title I funds must conduct outreach to all parents and family members and implement programs, activities, and procedures for the involvement of parents and family members. These programs, activities, and procedures shall be planned and implemented with meaningful consultation with parents and community members. Additionally, each LEA that receives Title I Part A funds is required to reserve a portion of the funds for parent and family engagement activities, students who are in homeless situations, and students who reside in local neglected and delinquent institutions. So under ESSA, there are specific requirements around parent and family engagement for both the LEA and their schools receiving Title I funding. Both the LEA and its schools must develop a parent and family engagement policy, build capacity for parent involvement, and provide accessibility to parents and family members to participate. The schools must adhere to the parent involvement requirements and develop a shared responsibility for a school-parent compact. The district must also reserve funds to assist schools with the parent and family engagement requirements. So on this slide, we've listed the key requirements and included a link to the CDE website where you can find more detailed information for your reference. So under ESSA Section 1116A3, an LEA with an allocation of more than $500,000 must reserve a minimum of 1% of its Title I Part A entitlement of that fiscal year for parent and family engagement activities. If an LEA receives less than $500,000 in Title I Part A allocations in the fiscal year, the LEA is not required to reserve any specific amount of Title I Part A funds for parent and family engagement activities. However, the provisions for parent and family engagement under ESSA Section 1116 must still be implemented. And the allowable uses for these funds include the following activities. It can be professional development for staff and faculty to develop their capacity in parent and family outreach and engagement strategies, providing programs for parents, the dissemination of information, supporting community school initiatives, and strategies that support the district's parent engagement policy. So real quickly, now we'll take a look at Title IV Part A and a new budget requirement that we want to bring to your attention. But first, let's review the purpose of Title IV Part A, and that is to provide all students with access to a well-rounded education, improve school conditions for student learning, improve the use of technology in order to improve the academic achievement and digital literacy of all students. So your Title IV Part A funded activities in your district should focus on the areas of greatest need identified through your needs assessment process. So now let's take a look at the Title IV Part A framework. LEAs are required to engage in meaningful consultation with a broad range of educational partners. That includes teachers, principals, families, paraprofessionals, community partners, and other specialized instructional support staff. Once the local needs are identified, the LEA, in consultation with these partners, determines the approaches that are most likely to be effective. Now, here's how the process typically looks. So first, you identify your local needs related to the 3 content areas. Next, you select activities that align with those identified needs. And then you develop a robust implementation plan that outlines how those activities will be carried out. And finally, you regularly review data to evaluate the effectiveness of those activities and inform your next steps. So here, we have that requirement stating that an LEA's financial management system must include a comparison of expenditures with budget amounts for each federal award. This is the first year that the Student Support and Academic Enrichment FPM reviewers will be requiring evidence showing that an LEA has budgeted its Title IV Part A allocation. Now, the requirement itself isn't new, but the FPM evidence request under SSAE Item 2 is. So like mentioned before, when creating your Title IV Part A budget, it's best practice to consult with key educational partners, gather feedback, and analyze your LEA's area of need. From there, you'll develop a needs assessment and create a budget that aligns with those identified needs. Now, let's talk about those allocations. For LEAs with $30,000 or more, at least 20% must go toward well-rounded education, another 20% towards safe and healthy students, and a portion of that toward technology. If your allocation is under $30,000, you'll need to choose from one of those first 2 areas and invest at least 20% there. And remember, CDE's Title IV Part A team is looking for full use of funds, meaning 100% obligated or expended by that deadline. And speaking of CDE's Title IV team, they developed a budget template shown here on the left to support LEAs that may not have a formal budgeting process, or they just want to streamline their current process. As you can see, the template includes sections to enter carryover amounts, the allocation itself, any transfers in or out, equitable services, and both administrative and indirect reservations. It also provides a breakdown of the spending requirements, helping LEAs ensure their budgets are aligned across the 3 content areas. And one important note, a budget report with only object codes will not meet the evidence requirement unless the LEA clearly identifies which content area each expenditure supports. On the right, you'll see an example provided by an LEA to the CDE during the first round of FPM reviews this year. So their budget wasn't created using the CDE's template. It was basically done in Excel, but it still showed a clear plan for allocating funds across the 3 content areas and budgeting 100% of their allocation. This example here shows just how simple and straightforward a compliant budget can be. In this case here, the LEA had no eligible private schools within its boundaries and did not claim administrative or indirect costs, making this a very clear and compliant example. We wanted to share this to illustrate how a basic, well-organized budget can still meet all the requirements and demonstrate compliance. So before we wrap up, let's just quickly recap the essential requirements in this new budget process for FPM reviews. The goal is to use your entire Title IV Part A allocation based on your LEA's documented needs. Just make sure your budget plan stays within those defined spending requirements. And also remember those required reservations, your proportional share, your indirect costs, and your admin costs. Please make sure they're included when applicable. Are you brand new to the position and not sure if your LEA applied for and received Title IV Part A funds? Oh, don't have to worry. A link to the 25-26 Title IV Part A allocations are also on this slide for your reference. Thank you all for your time. It's good to see you guys. Now I'll hand it off to Rachel.
Thank you, Augustine, and good morning, everyone. So in this next section, we're going to be taking a look at school site council requirements, including responsibilities, composition, and selection requirements. So a school site council is an elected group of school site representatives that includes parents, teachers, other school personnel, the principal or their designee, and at the secondary level also includes students. Per Education Code, a school site council must be established if the school operates a program funded through the consolidated application that requires a school plan for student achievement, or SIPSA. And so that means schools that receive Title I funds and operate a school-wide program are required to establish a school site council. And we often get asked if charter schools are required to have a school site council. And the answer depends on whether or not the charter school is using its LCAP to serve as the SIPSA. Education Code 64001J allows single school districts and charter schools to use its LCAP as the SIPSA to meet federal school planning requirements. So that means if a charter school is using its LCAP to serve as the SIPSA, meaning it has one combined plan that meets the legal requirements of the LCAP and the SIPSA, then it is not required to establish a school site council. Instead, the charter school must meet the stakeholder requirements that are specified in Education Code 52062A, which includes establishing a parent advisory council and an EL parent advisory council as applicable. Now, if a charter school is not using the LCAP as its SIPSA and is completing a separate LCAP and SIPSA, then it is required to establish a school site council to develop the SIPSA. So the main responsibility of the school site council is to develop and approve the SIPSA. And so this includes annually reviewing and updating the contents of the plan and proposed expenditures. The development process must also include conducting a comprehensive needs assessment and identifying a process to monitor the implementation of the plan and evaluate its effectiveness. Additionally, the SIPSA must be developed with the review, certification, and advice of the School English Learner Advisory Committee, or ELAC, if required. The School Site Council is also responsible for recommending the SIPSA to the local governing board for approval. The School Site Council is also responsible for annually developing the Comprehensive School Safety Plan. However, keep in mind that the School Site Council has the option to delegate this task to a School Safety Planning Committee that must meet the composition requirements specified in Education Code 32281B2. So at an elementary school, the School Site Council shall be composed of two groups: school staff members, which are shown here in the light blue, and parent and/or community members in the dark blue. And there must be parity or equal numbers of members across the school staff members and the parent community members. So half of the school site council must be composed of school staff, which includes the principal or their designee, classroom teachers employed at the school, and other school personnel employed at the school who are not classroom teachers. The classroom teachers selected must also constitute the majority of the school staff members. So given that classroom teachers have to make up the majority of the staff members on the council, the minimum number of teachers required is 3. The other half of the school site council must be composed of parents of pupils attending the school and/or other members of the school community. And per Education Code, the number of parent and/or community members selected must equal the number of school staff members selected. So this means that the minimum number of school site council members at an elementary school is 10. So that would be 1 principal or their designee, 1 other school personnel, 3 classroom teachers, and 5 parent and/or community members. At the secondary level, the school site council must be composed of the school staff member group and the parent and/or community group, and that also includes student members. So the staff composition requirements for secondary schools are the same as the staff composition requirements for elementary schools. So again, the school staff members must include the principal or his or her designee, classroom teachers employed at the school, and other school personnel employed at the school who are not teachers. And then again, classroom teachers selected must constitute the majority of the school staff members. The other half of the council composition at the secondary level includes parents of students attending the school or other members of the school community, and also students attending the school. Previously, parity was required between the parents and the community member group and students. However, this is no longer the case. A secondary school site council must include at least one parent or community member and one student. The composition of the remaining parent community student members is determined locally. And so again, the minimum number of school site council members for secondary schools is also 10. Keeping in mind the composition requirements that were just shared for elementary and secondary schools on the previous slides, this chart displays a few options for school site council composition. And so in the first column, you can see the minimum number of school site council members to meet the composition requirements is 10 at both the elementary and secondary level. The school site council can be larger as long as it meets the composition requirements, including parity or equal numbers of staff members and parent community members at the elementary level, and equal number of staff members and parent community and student members at the secondary level. So with the 12-member school site council, you can see that there must be 6 members on the school staff side and 6 members on the parent community side. Or if it's a secondary school, 6 members on the parent community student member side. Also in that scenario, you can see that there must be 4 classroom teachers to ensure classroom teachers make up the majority of the school staff side. And then also just please note that a middle school with 6th, 7th, and 8th grades may, but is not required to include student representation on the school site council. Likewise, junior high schools with 7th and 8th grade also have the option to include students. High schools are required to include students on the school site council, or at least one student. School site council members must be selected by their peers, with the exception of the principal or their designee. And so this means that classroom teachers must be selected by classroom teachers. Other school personnel who are not classroom teachers must be selected by other school personnel who are not classroom teachers. And parents and community members must be selected by parents of students attending the school. At the secondary level, students attending the school must be selected by students attending the school. Since members must be selected by their peers, no seat on the school site council may be reserved for any group or individual. Now, the principal or their designee is automatically a member of the school site council and therefore is the only non-elected member. As a reminder, parent members may not be employees at the school. While a parent who is employed at their child's school cannot be selected to represent the parent side of the school site council, they could be selected to represent the staff side. Also, for student members at the secondary level, remember that the option to serve on the school site council must be open to any student enrolled at the school. The school or district cannot set additional qualifications for student membership. And so that means all students attending the school must have the opportunity to select the student members. Now, statute does not specify how members are selected by their peers. So this is something that can be done through a ballot process or through an open meeting vote. Individuals may also self-nominate. So additional requirements, such as the process for selecting school site council members and officers and the terms of office for members and officers, that should be defined in your local bylaws. So it's really important to note that school site council composition is reviewed through the FPM process, specifically in item 5 of the Compensatory Education Program instrument. And it's something that continues to be in the top 5 frequently non-compliant items for CE, or compensatory education. And so last year in 24-25, it was the 4th most frequent finding for CE due to schools having an incorrect school site council composition, or also due to lacking or insufficient evidence of the peer selection process. So if you're selected for an FPM review, evidence requests for this item will include a final school site council roster with the member names and the member groups clearly identified. And then also evidence of the peer selection results for each school site council member group. So this might include a completed sample ballot with peer selection results for each member group. And just keep in mind that CDE has indicated that a blank ballot does not meet the legal requirements for this. Now, Education Code also allows for some school site council exceptions for small schools. And so the first exception is that schools with a common site administrator may operate a shared school site council if the school has less than 300 students. Another exception is that up to 3 schools with a combined population of less than 1,000 students may operate a shared school site council if the schools have a shared campus or if the schools have geographic proximity to one another and similar student populations. But with both of these exceptions, shared school site councils must still meet the composition requirements that were explained in the previous slides. So that would include a minimum of 10 members with parity or equal representation between each group. Another exception is that schools with fewer than 300 students may operate a reduced school site council that has the representation of all of the following. So 1 principal, 1 teacher selected by teachers, 1 other school personnel selected by other school personnel, and 3 parents or community members selected by parents at the elementary level. Or if it's a secondary school, then 2 parents or community members selected by parents and 1 student selected by students. But for this exception to occur, the local governing board or body must receive approval from its local bargaining units. So here we've included a few frequently asked questions related to school site council meetings. And so school site council meetings are required to adhere to the Green Act. Among other things, the Green Act requires the meeting notice or agenda to be posted at least 72 hours prior to the meeting with the date, time, and location of the meeting, as well as a description of each item of business to be discussed or acted upon. And also that school site council meetings be open to the public and allow for any member of the public to address the school site council on any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the school site council. We are often asked how many school site council meetings are required to be held each year. And so the number of meetings, this is something that may be determined locally, as statute does not require a specific number of school site council meetings. So really, there just needs to be a sufficient number of meetings for the school site council to be able to complete its legally required responsibilities. And additionally, school site council meetings, they may be held virtually as long as the meetings comply with the Green Act requirements. So it's important to provide training for school site council members in order for them to understand their role and responsibilities and their legal obligations. So school site council members may need training on the Green Act requirements to ensure that the council follows the requirements for holding public school site council meetings and conducting business at these meetings. And so here we've listed other possible training topics, which include bylaws and meeting procedures, what the Title I program is and the requirements for a school-wide program or targeted assistance model, the purpose and allowable uses of state and federal program funds, or also how to analyze student achievement data, evidence-based instructional practices, and monitoring implementation and evaluating the effectiveness of the plan and strategies. But the training topics really depend on the needs of the school site council in order to help them fulfill their legal obligations. So as previously mentioned, it's important to maintain documentation related to the school site council composition and the peer selection process to ensure that the school site council has been properly constituted. Additionally, school site councils must maintain documentation and evidence that demonstrates that they have fulfilled their legal responsibilities. And so some examples of this documentation include, as mentioned, the school site council roster, and then any election or selection documentation, such as nomination forms or ballots, official correspondence, such as meeting notices sent to school site council members, also meeting agendas, minutes, and sign-in sheets. You'll want to maintain evidence of ELAC input in the development of the school plan, and then also copies of prior year school plans. So if you're selected for an FPM review, many of these items will be requested by reviewers to verify that the school site council has fulfilled their required responsibilities. And then lastly, school site council records, materials, and supporting documents must be retained for a period of 3 years. However, it's recommended that you maintain this documentation for 5 years. And so that concludes this section. I will now turn it over to Laurel.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. Today, I'll be providing more information about federal program monitoring, and specifically, I'll go over the Comprehensive Sexual Health Education Program Monitoring Instrument. Before I begin, I want to remind you of information we provided previously. Currently, the only way to access the 25-26 FPM program instruments is through the CD's FPM box. We've mentioned several of those instruments and linked them to this presentation, but all of those instruments are available in the box. You'll find folders for each program being reviewed, and we want to encourage everyone to check out the box in order to access the FPM presentations and resource materials for the 25-26 school year. Monitoring for comprehensive sexual health education is a relatively new FPM component. Previously, at our state and federal program directors meetings, we've provided information on the California Healthy Youth Act. We've included several links here to resources for meeting those requirements here on this slide. Today, we're going to provide information about the type of evidence that will be needed in an FPM review. Even if an LEA has not been identified for FPM currently, best practice is to review these requirements for ongoing compliance. For the most part, using CHYA compliant curricula typically meets many state and federal program compliance requirements, but let's take a closer look. The Comprehensive Sexual Health Education Program Instrument is broken down into 7 components that are listed here. A link to the program instrument itself is included in this slide, but as I mentioned, all of the instruments are available in the box. And there are references throughout the instrument to the California Healthy Youth Act because the compliance requirements of FPM comprehensive sexual health education are largely embedded within the California Healthy Youth Act. While the list of 7 program instrument components included in the previous slide might seem a little daunting at first glance, several of the evidence requests are duplicative. While additional evidence might be available based on your local LEA context for implementation, the evidence included throughout the program instrument is compiled here in this list. CDE staff are always helpful when LEAs have questions about what evidence would show compliance, and your team here in the LACO LCAP State and Federal Programs Unit can also assist with questions about evidence requests. Typically, the policy and AR related to sexual health and HIV/AIDS prevention instruction would be included as evidence. However, the other policy titles listed on this slide might also be applicable. The bottom line is to be sure that your LEA has policies and administrative regulations that are board approved and reflect the most recent state legislation related to comprehensive sexual health education. Speaking of revisions to statute, this slide contains newly required instruction as of January 1st this year. Sexual health curricula must include information about adolescent relationship abuse and intimate partner violence. The new California Ed Code language is in red font, and the references to statute and Ed Code are also included in this slide. It's important to be sure that pacing guides, curricula, professional development, board policies, ARs, and anything else pertaining to the LEA's compliance with implementing comprehensive sexual health education and HIV prevention are current and include this newly required instruction. In a related update, beginning in the 26-27 school year, LEAs must update their health education course that's required for high school graduation in order to include information about the dangers associated with fentanyl use. This slide contains links to California legislative information, various resources for instructional support, and a link to CSBA support for board policy and AR development. Finally, we provide some tips for being compliance ready when it comes to administering federal comprehensive sexual health education requirements. Make sure that board policies and ARs are current. Professional development should cover both sexual health education and HIV prevention education. Be sure to document grade levels in which comprehensive sexual health education is taught and by whom. Show the entire curricula, including copyright dates and visual media. We've provided just a few resources in this presentation, but please know that many more are available to assist you in fulfilling these requirements. Due to recent policy updates, be aware that parent opt-out must be in writing and must contain specific content from which the student is opted out. And as with all things related to state and federal programs, don't hesitate to reach out to our team if we can provide additional information or support. And with that, I'll hand it over to Helen, who will go over some important LCAP updates.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Laurel. My name is Helen Choi, and I'll be reviewing the mid-year update reporting and the LCAP updates today. So before we get started, I want to remind you of the LCAP timeline that is also linked on this slide. As we look at the winter-spring timeline for your LCAP development, your LEAs can prepare for both programs and fiscal staff, compiling key metrics from the dashboard. It just got released, right? CalPads, data quests, surveys, and local outcomes. LEAs should also report expenditures, look at the potential carryover, and engaging educational partners in the goal analysis. And remember that a big part of the winter-spring timeline is also to prepare for the mid-year update report to the board by February 28, 2026. So let's now dive into the mid-year update reports. So when preparing the mid-year update, focus on presenting information that is meaningful for your governing board and your educational partners. and clearly connects to the LEA's ongoing goal analysis and your continuous improvement work. And again, as a reminder, by February 28th, all charter schools, districts, and county offices must present the annual update to the LCAP and the LCFF budget overview for parents at a regularly scheduled board meeting. So this update includes the outcome data that's currently available for this year's metrics, along with the implementation and expenditure information for actions underway. So this visual here highlights the key components required for the mid-year report. A coordinated approach where the program, accountability, and the fiscal teams work together to produce an accurate and meaningful report. The individuals collecting this information or the teams that are collecting this information are often already responsible for monitoring implementation, tracking outcomes, or managing expenditures. So this process should naturally align with the LEA's annual cycle. And you may also be wondering whether there is a required format for this report or if it becomes part of the LCAP. The statute does not require that the presentation be included in the LCAP submitted for adoption, nor does it require county oversight or approval for the LEA's presentation. LEAs have the flexibility to determine the format of their presentation as there is no required template. We suggest that LEAs maintain documentation of their presentation in the minutes of their public meeting. Several statutory requirements, including providing an annual update report in accordance with Educational Code Section 5206-2A6 or 5206-8A6, are addressed also in the audit guide. What's important in planning the presentation is ensuring that the information is meaningful to the governing board and educational partners, and that it clearly connects to the LEA's goal analysis and continuous improvement process. The audit guide and the sample board agenda item are linked here for your reference. So here are some considerations in planning for and presenting the available information that will provide an update about the progress being made towards metrics in this year's LCAP and an update on what's in place and the related costs for the planned actions to date. LEAs may consider organizing staff to access sources of data for all metrics in each LCAP goal. LEAs may also organize staff with oversight responsibility for implementation of specific actions to collect and share what is in place to date, and this may include reporting about the actions that are just starting or those that have not begun. So for example, principals may have the key information about implementation to date for specific actions at their school sites. Additionally, for reporting on mid-year expenditure actions, it will be important to determine a mid-year point in time from which fiscal personnel can provide an update on expenditure to date for all actions in the approved plan. The next few slides offer some considerations for sharing information in the mid-year update report. First, let's talk about the metrics. When reviewing outcomes, you can categorize them as undetermined, in progress, or determined. An outcome is undetermined when there's not enough data to assess the progress. In progress means efforts are underway and measurable progress has been observed. Outcome determined means that data has been reviewed and shows a clear status for the outcome. This is a sample showing the different outcome status for the 25-26 LCAP metrics. The chronic absenteeism rate have been reviewed and has been determined. The suspension rate shows measurable progress and is in progress. And student connectedness will be assessed in March 2026, so its status is undetermined. This helps educational partners and the board understand where we have solid data, where progress is underway, and where outcomes are still pending. To maintain clarity, LEAs can consider summarizing key metrics and actions in a slide deck while providing a comprehensive table in a separate document for the board and the public. Here, as you can see, at this point in the school year, each action implementation status is categorized as one of the following. implementation pending, the action has not yet been initiated, implementation in progress, the action is underway, and the key steps are actively being carried out, implementation completed, the action has been fully implemented. This framework helps educational partners and board understand the status of each action and where the efforts are ongoing. This is a sample of implementation progress by action for a specific goal. Some actions, like providing after-school academic support, are in progress with measurable improvement for students. Others, such as Winter Recess Academic Intervention Program, have been completed, while some, like College and Career Readiness workshops, are pending and scheduled for later this year. Budgeted expenditures and estimated actuals at the first interim have been used to support and track the implementation progress. You can consider providing again a comprehensive table in a separate document for the board and the public while highlighting key actions in a slide deck. So along with the mid-year update on the implementation of the actions, like I have shared, LEAs are also providing the mid-year expenditure data. This information will be reported year-to-date implementation data about what has occurred and the spending information for all the actions included in the 25-26 LCAP. LEAs will need to determine the mid-year data they use for collection of the implementation and the expenditure data to share in their presentation. When reporting mid-year expenditures, LEAs may consider aligning to the first interim budget reporting, which would have been calculated by the District Fiscal Services in November and reported to the board in December. Keep in mind, second interim will report expenditures through January 31st, and the fiscal staff may not have had time to complete the calculations prior to the February 28th board presentation deadline. The key takeaway here is that for whatever the mid-year date the LEA selects for their reporting date, it will be important for the program and the fiscal to connect so that the data about the mid-year expenditure and the implementation data are consistent. Here's another sample. The organizer offered here reports on action and expenditure for a goal in the plan. It includes a display of all actions for each LCAP goals organized by status of the mid-year implementation. Included here are 3 levels of status to reflect the degree of implementation. In addition, the LEA would determine the description that would provide the local context about their level of implementation for all their actions in the goal and would provide a fiscal update for each of the goals in this year's LCAP. So another thing to consider is that when the LEA adopted its LCAP and the budget, the State Budget Act had not yet been finalized. The final state budget included in additional funds that are not anticipated by the LEA, and the impact on the adopted budget overview for parents should be shared. And again, this should include the additional LREBG funds that were received as part of the 25-26 apportionment. And we will discuss LREBG options more in depth in December. So be sure that you come back in December to get more information on those options. And finally, mid-year report timeline is provided to assist your LEAs with requirements for collection and preparation for the presentation of the mid-year report. And we have updated our resources for the 26-27 LCAP, and also in it, we have the 25-26 mid-year update report resources. And so please check it out. We have the CDE, FAQ, and again, the sample board agenda item that you can use for the mid-year update report. So now on to the LCAP update. All right, I'm gonna hear hooray. I'll see like some thumbs up and hearts going up. There are no changes to the LCAP template and the instructions for 26 and 27. Oh, I see those hearts. Hooray, I love it. That's right. So yes, there are no changes, right? Music to my ears. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, right? So LEAs will continue implementing the required actions established based on the 2023 dashboard through the end of the current 3-year LCAP cycle as required by Ed Code Section 52064E6. These required actions will not be updated to reflect the 2025 dashboard. Right. And for LEAs with schools that qualify for equity multiplier funding, there are a couple of key requirements for the 26-27 LCAP. First, the LCAP must include at least one focus goal that addresses all student groups at the eligible schools who are performing at the lowest level on one or more state indicators on the 2025 dashboard. Second, if there are any issues with educator credentialing, subject matter preparation, or staff retention, those underlying issues also need to be addressed in the focus goal. So essentially, the focus goal should target both student performance needs and any educator-related factors contributing to those outcomes. And there is something new this year, right? So beginning with the 2025 annual audit, auditors will verify that each LEA adopted its LCAP on or before July 1st as required by Ed Code 52065.1. If an LEA does not meet this deadline, the auditor is required to assess a fiscal penalty, yeah, I said it, penalty, equal to 20% of the LEA's second principal apportionment, with an additional 1% added for each business day after July 1st that the LCAP remains unadopted. So as part of this requirement, LEAs must also comply with the applicable provisions of Ed Code Section 47606.5A and F, 52062B, or 52068B. And for updates to the metrics, and as I've mentioned, yes, the dashboard is here. So as you are preparing for the mid-year update report and for your LCAP goal analysis, it is recommended that you put the available that is available now so that you can truly look at the effectiveness of these actions. In the next slide, we'll see where this data is to be documented. Here, we can see where the data for the metrics included in the approved LCAP goals will be reported in the 25-26 LCAP. I'm sorry, 26-27 LCAP. In the measuring and reporting results section, the first 3 columns shows the metric number, metric description, and baseline, while the 6th column shows year 3 target from the approved target from the approved LCAP. As we enter the 3rd year of the 3-year cycle for the 26-27 LCAP, LEAs will add year 2 outcome and calculate the current difference from the baseline, comparing the year 2 data to the original baseline. We have sample metrics available on our resource page, also linked on this slide. CDE recommends that if the LEA added a new metric in the 25-26 LCAP, the outcome for that metric should still be entered in the year 2 outcomes column. This is because this is a 3-year cycle, and placing the outcome in the year 2 column helps show the sequence of data and supports educational partners in understanding when the LEA first evaluated the effectiveness of this action. And our closing slide in this section provides the dates for CDE's LCAP training, which began this month. The webinars are scheduled for Tuesdays at 2 p.m. and Thursdays at 3 p.m. That's easy to remember. The topics and registration links are included on this slide. And there are 6 more sessions, including one today at 3 p.m. So this ends this section. And here are some upcoming deadlines. There's CalPAT's Fall 1 submission window, which started October 1st to January 23rd, 26, with the certification due on December 12th, 2025, and the amendments are due on January 23rd, 2026. CMDC reporting period 3 opens on January 10th with submission due on January 31st. Note that the report is required even if the cash balance is 0. And the CONAP 2020 CONAP winter release runs from December 1st to January 15th with the initial certification due on January 15th, and the amendment window will open through February 15th. And SARC must be board approved and submitted to CDE by February 1st. And lastly, again, the LCAP mid-year update must be presented as a non-consent item to the governing board or body on or before February 28th. So that is all we have for today. So we want to thank you. Please take your time to share any feedback with us. We carefully review the comments and use your suggestions to guide our future improvements. And as we enter this Thanksgiving season, we want to express how grateful we are for your partnership and all the hard work that you do every day to support our students. And again, we truly appreciate any feedback that you can provide for us. And the link should be in the chat now. And our next State and Federal Programs Directors meeting is scheduled for Thursday, December 18th from 10 to 11:30. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. And if you have any last minute questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat and we will get the Q&A out to you as soon as possible. And thank you again. Happy Thanksgiving and have a wonderful day.